is Satan the devil? Is he a work of fiction? A myth? Is he really a reddish-colored, horned creature with a tail and a pitchfork? Perhaps devils and demons are just relics of the superstitious Dark Ages. Seriously, who could believe that Satan really resides in a subterranean inferno where he tortures hapless souls for eternity, as the Catholic Church and its many offshoots have taught for centuries? But if there is such a creature, where did he come from? Did God create the devil, as some contend? If not, what will become of the one whom Jesus referred to as the wicked one? The Bible is the only source of truth. Some may scoff in disbelief, but they cannot disprove the Bible. That is because the Holy Scriptures are a work of God, inspired by Jehovah, the God of truth. Unfortunately, many of those who claim to believe the Bible do not understand it. According to the only human who actually knew Satan in his former life in heaven was Jesus, and he said that the devil was the father of the lie and the ruler of the world. But how did this situation come about? How did a wicked spirit come to be the father of the lie and the ruler of the world? If Jehovah is almighty, why doesn't he simply vanquish this evil God who has been ruling the world for the past 6,000 years? Jehovah's Book of Truth has the answers. Long before God created the universe, with its countless stars and innumerable galaxies, God became the father to millions of sons in the spirit realm. God, of course, is a spirit, and spirits live outside the physical dimension. They are not made of atoms and molecules, which we define as matter, nor are they subject to forces like gravity. God likens his spirit sons to fire. That helps us understand that spirits are a higher, superior, energetic life form. More than likely, spirits move faster than the speed of light, which is why they are invisible to humans. In relation to God, his spirit sons are gods themselves, although they are mortal. That is why the immortal Jehovah is called the God of gods. As with humans, God created his spirit sons with free will. It is God's intention, his hope, that his intelligent creation will love him above all else. What parent doesn't want to be loved and honored by their children? But love must be voluntary. Otherwise, is it love? So those many individuals that God created in the spirit dimension can choose not to love God, meaning they can take a selfish course against their Father's will. They can love themselves more than they love God if they choose. They are free to rebel against God, to go their own way. And that is exactly what happened. There are different ranks of spirits in the heavenly realm. There is the archangel named Michael, and there are seraphs, as well as cherubs and angels. The Bible does not say much about them, except in the beginning, they all worshiped and served Jehovah God. The prophecy of Ezekiel shed some light upon the origin of the spirit creature that became known as Satan the devil. Speaking to the king of Tyre through his prophet, Jehovah said the following:
You were the model of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. You were adorned with every precious stone: ruby, topaz, and jasper, chrysolite, onyx, and jade, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald. And their settings and mountings were made of gold. They were prepared on the day you were created. I assigned you as the anointed covering cherub. You were on the holy mountain of God, and you walked about among fiery stones. You were faultless in your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you.
There were only two people in Eden, the first man and woman. It should be obvious that the king of Tyre was not in the Garden of Eden. The description given of a creature adorned with every precious stone is to convey to us the glory that God imparted to his spirit sons. And one angelic son was given a special assignment by God to serve as the anointed covering cherub in Eden. In other words, he was Adam and Eve's guardian angel. He was perfect, as were Adam and Eve. How then did this glorious cherub become unrighteous? Jesus said that the devil was the father of the lie. No one had ever told a lie before. What was the first lie? It was what Satan told Eve: You will not die. God had commanded the first couple not to eat fruit from a particular tree. It was special. It belonged to God, and it represented his right as the Creator to determine for his creatures what is good and bad. Apparently, the assigned angel developed an envy of God, along with pride and conceit in his own wisdom and beauty. Coveting the worship that belonged exclusively to the Creator, the covering cherub hatched a scheme to deceive Eve into believing that God had lied. Much like a ventriloquist puppeteer, the cunning cherub made it appear that the serpent was speaking, and Eve, who at the time may have only been a few days old, listened. He slyly posed the innocent-sounding question:
Did God really say you must not eat from every tree at the garden?
At this, the woman said to the serpent,
We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but God has said about the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, You must not eat from it. No, you must not touch it, otherwise you will die.
At this, the serpent said to the woman,
You certainly will not die, for God knows that in the very day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and bad.
The presumptuous cherub not only lied, but he impugned God's character, accusing him of selfishly denying Eve, and by extension everyone else, something we are entitled to. Time has been allowed for the accuser so that God may respond. Of course, when Adam and Eve eventually died, it became apparent that Satan had lied. Eating the forbidden fruit resulted in death, just as Jehovah had warned. But how can God possibly demonstrate that he is not too high and mighty to allow anyone else to determine for themselves what is right and wrong? God's response to the devil's slander is Christianity, more especially the end result of Christianity. Contrary to the satanic lie that humans have an immortal soul that survives the death of the body, the Bible shows quite clearly that humans are mortal. Jesus explained it very simply. He said, "Do not become fearful of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in Gehenna." The most popular Bible translations say that both body and soul are destroyed in hell. But Jesus did not use the word Hades. He said Gehenna. Gehenna was an actual place. It was a valley on the edge of the city of Jerusalem. It was basically a garbage dump where carcasses of dead animals were pitched. Chunks of sulfur called brimstone were burned to consume the refuse. Even dead bodies of criminals deemed unworthy of a decent burial were pitched over the edge and into the fire of Gehenna. So Jesus used the well-known site of Gehenna to represent everlasting death. Rather than proving that the soul is immortal, Jesus urged us to fear God because he can destroy both body and soul in Gehenna. What did Jesus mean? He was contrasting two types of death: temporary death and permanent death. Men may kill us, but they cannot prevent God from resurrecting the dead. However, if we compromise our faith to save our lives, as Satan has contended, God is not obligated to resurrect us. In that instance, death would be permanent. Because Jesus made such an extraordinary sacrifice, not only leaving behind his place in heaven and his divinity, Jesus allowed himself to be executed like a common criminal. Christ proved that Satan lied when, in the instance of Job, the devil claimed that men would turn their backs on God to save their lives. Because of Jesus' faithfulness even to death, God not only brought Jesus back from the grave, some translations say that Jesus came back from hell, but God gave Jesus something he did not possess before. What is that? Life in himself. Jesus said, "For just as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted also to the Son to have life in himself." Having life in oneself is what immortality is. Jehovah is the source of all life. That is because he has always had life in himself. No one gave God life. He has always been alive and always will be. But as a human, Jesus did not have life in himself. He depended on God to bring him back from the dead. But now that Jesus lives, he can never die again. That is because he is now, like the Father, having life in himself. It should be obvious, but if it is not, I will point out that not even the angels have life in themselves. So even though God intended for Adam and Eve and all of their descendants to live forever, humans do not have life in themselves, and they never will. they must depend upon God to supply all the things necessary for life. But Jesus indicated that others will also have life in themselves. Jesus said, "Most truly I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in yourselves. Whoever feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood has everlasting life, and I will resurrect him on the last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. Whoever feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood remains in union with me, and I in union with him." Being in union with Christ is only possible if God anoints you with Holy Spirit and begets you as a spirit son, just as he did with Jesus when he was baptized. Ultimately, God has purposed for 144,000 persons to have life in themselves. That means they will no longer be dependent upon God for life. Theoretically, they could decide for themselves what is right and wrong and go their own way, even as some angels already have. We know, though, that because they will know Jehovah on the same level that Jesus does, they will always be loyal to the one who gave them life in themselves. Hence, the slanderous cherub's accusation that God is too selfish to allow anyone to share his prerogative will be shown to be a lie. The ultimate humiliation for Satan is that God intends to give everything to his firstborn son, including his throne, and even worship, the very thing the covering cherub coveted. In his letter to the Hebrews, Paul explained that because of what Jesus did as a man, God has exalted him above the angels, and when he brings his firstborn into the world again, a second time, referring to the second coming of Christ, God will command his angels to worship him. And more astoundingly, when Christ has brought the devil to nothing, he will hand over the power and authority God gave him and subject himself to the one who subjected all things to him. As for the devil, the time allotted for him to play God is about up. Returning to the prophecy of Ezekiel, God's word reveals Satan's fate.
Because of your abundant trade, you became filled with violence, and you began to sin. So I will cast you out as profane from the mountain of God and destroy you, O covering cherub, away from the stones of fire.
Since it is obvious that the covering cherub was not destroyed when Nebuchadnezzar waged a successful but grueling 13-year siege against Tyre, what is the connection between Satan and the once illustrious city of Tyre? Tyre foreshadows the modern city of London, which has served as the capital city of the Anglo Empire for the last 3 centuries. The details of this connection have been laid out in the book Jehovah Has Become King, in the chapter entitled London, Satan's Throne. Here is an excerpt from the book. In the 27th chapter of Ezekiel, the prophet is commanded to compose a dirge for the passing of Tyre. The opening words of the dirge say of Tyre, "O you who are dwelling at the entrances of the sea, the tradeswoman of the peoples for many lands." The Phoenician coastal city of Tyre is recorded in history as dominating the Mediterranean Sea with her fleet of merchant ships, even plying the waters of the North and South Atlantic. Yet the description of Tyre as one dwelling at the entrances of the sea applies even more especially to London's British Empire. During the days of the formal empire, she controlled virtually every major waterway in the entire world. This was vital in view of the fact that London's empire was a maritime empire. One of the most important entrances of the sea is the natural sea gate through the Straits of Gibraltar. The Straits of Gibraltar are, of course, the vital entryway connecting the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. Interestingly, the Phoenicians and Tyrians once held that sea gate too, and for the last several centuries it has been a British-held fortress. Gibraltar was a strategic British asset during both world wars. The Suez Canal is another vital waterway that makes it possible to travel from the Indian Ocean through the Red Sea and into the Mediterranean Sea without looping all the way around Africa. It was particularly vital for British imperial interests to control the Gibraltar and Suez sea gates because that allowed Britain more direct access to her most important colony at that time, India. By 1900, British naval bases were maintained around the world at strategic choke points, which gave London a presence on virtually every major sea lane on the planet. For example, since around 1860, the Royal Navy's Pacific Fleet has been harbored at Esquimalt, British Columbia. On the Atlantic side of the Western Hemisphere, a British naval presence was maintained in Halifax, Nova Scotia, as well as Bermuda and Jamaica and St. Lucia. On the opposite side of the Atlantic, the Royal Navy was based at Gibraltar and Freetown in the African colony of Sierra Leone. From 1814, after wresting control from the Dutch colonists, the British established a naval presence at Cape Town, South Africa, which allowed them to control the shipping lanes around the southern tip of Africa. On the east side of Africa, at the turn of the 20th century, the Royal Navy was harbored at Mombasa, Kenya. Other critical choke points included Aden and Yemen, which was at the entryway of the southern end of the Red Sea, where it joins the Indian Ocean. From bases in Bombay, Ceylon, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Sydney, Britain controlled the vital waterways of the Indian subcontinent and the entire Orient, as well as the sea lanes of the countless islands of the South Pacific. Unquestionably, Great Britain once sat at the entrances of the sea, and to a great extent it still does. But besides controlling crucial shipping lanes, sea gates, and other vital infrastructure, the Crown maintains a virtual empire composed of dozens of islands scattered across the 7 seas of the globe. Anguilla and Barbuda, Bermuda, the Falklands, British Virgin Islands, Jamaica, the Solomon Islands, St. Helena, and the Cayman Islands, to name a few. Of these, the Cayman Islands appear to be the most important, serving as a virtual modern-day pirate cove for offshore drug money laundering, tax evasion, and other illegal operations, which are carried out through the thousands of hedge funds registered there. As of 2007, of the nearly 10,000 hedge funds in the world, over 8,000 are registered to the Cayman Islands. For an island grouping with a total population of less than 60,000, that means that there is one hedge fund for every 7.5 people on the islands. Truly, to whatever extent Tyre may have colonized the Mediterranean region, we may be sure that the prophet's words apply even more so to the far-flung British Empire. In the heart of the vast seas are your territories. Also, Ezekiel 27:15 accurately describes the British maritime system, saying of it, "Many islands were merchants in your employ." It is worth noting that 3 chapters of Ezekiel are devoted to Tyre, followed by 3 chapters denouncing Egypt. Together, Tyre and Egypt represent the Anglo-American dual world power. Interestingly, The leader of Tyre is described as the overseer of Eden, whereas Egypt is described as the grandest tree in the Garden of Eden. This corresponds to the reality that London has, in various ways, acquired control over the political and economic affairs of America. Since Satan is the unseen god of this system, the judgment against him will be reflected on earth by the downfall of antitypical Tyre. Here is what Jehovah has said.
Your heart became haughty because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom because of your own glorious splendor. I will throw you down to the earth. I will make you a spectacle before kings. Because of your great guilt and your dishonest trading, you have profaned your sanctuaries. I will cause a fire to break out in your midst, and it will consume you. I will reduce you to ashes on the earth before all those looking at you. All who knew you among the peoples will stare at you in amazement. Your end will be sudden and terrible, and you will cease to exist for all time.
The 12th chapter of Revelation reveals that when Christ takes up his rulership, war immediately breaks out in heaven. Michael, Jesus' heavenly name, together with his angels, will do battle with the devil and his demon angels, and down to the earth they will be thrown. In the 13th chapter of Revelation, it is apparent that Satan's ouster immediately precedes the mortal wound inflicted upon the head of the beast. The prophecy of Ezekiel expresses the slaughter of the head of the beast as the destruction of the city of Tyre. The dishonest trading of London is well known. The floating exchange IMF system was engineered by London and has been used to loot and impoverish nations. Not only is London the primary hub of the $3 trillion of daily turnover in foreign exchange, most of which is financial speculation and has nothing to do with the actual trade of goods, it is also the center of derivatives exchange. Financial derivatives are now estimated to be more than $2 quadrillion, and more than $10 trillion of worthless derivatives are traded daily on the London Derivatives Exchange. A fire breaking out in the midst of the Tyre on the Thames will herald the downfall of Satan. It will likely be expressed by the sudden collapse of the financial system headquartered in London and, to a lesser extent, its subsidiary in the U.S., Wall Street. The system nearly collapsed in 2008 and again in 2019. Under the guise of pandemic relief, trillions of dollars were pumped into the banking system to reinflate the collapsing bubble. Given the fragility of the casino economy, there is no way it can survive an all-out shooting war between the nuclear powers. As Jesus said, no one knows the day or hour. But a system built on usury, drug running, money laundering, and exploitation, not to mention computer-driven speculation, cannot continue indefinitely. The sudden crash of the present system will mark the beginning of the end for Satan the devil and the world he rules over.